Hello, everyone. Elliot here from Eat Sleep Boxing Repeat, joined by my esteemed colleague and cohort Danny. We're here to talk through a fight that's taking place coming up shortly over in Abu Dhabi at the Etihad Arena. Needs minimal introduction, but we're going to give it an introduction and we're going to talk through it today. So the fight we're going to be talking about is Bivol versus Ramirez. So I'm just going to give a couple of sort of well, actually, no, Danny. First and foremost, I'm going to say, how are you, sir? I know you had
Yeah,
a late one last night, but are you well? Is everything going okay?
yeah, late one last night, staying up to watch Lomachenko, Jake Paul. Had a stiff coffee, a shower, and a banana, so ready to go.
You're a braver and more durable man than I am, certainly. But we're talking about the Bivol Ramirez. Obviously, Bivol 20-0 with 11 KOs. Couple of I suppose standout victories for British fans or for global boxing fans. Obviously, recently defeated Canelo Alvarez, stepping up there to challenge him. Point decision victory there. The British fans obviously defeating Craig Richards. He's got other victories over people like Chilemba, Joe Smith Jr. To name but a few. And he's taking on Ramirez, who is 31 years old, 44 victories, undefeated, 30 KOs in those victories. But I suppose if you're looking at it, names that would sort of stand out there, people like, I suppose, Jesse Hart, um, Alfonso Lopez to a degree, Gonzalez, maybe those sort of guys are the names that stand out on his record. So we're going to just talk about this fight, well, semi briefly, or as briefly as we can, I suppose, with giving you also some insight. Danny, I'm going to come to you first with a couple of questions. Obviously, there's two of us here, so essentially, I'm just going to be probably pinging you questions. And as I said off camera, your boxing knowledge is better than me, so that's the dynamic that we're gonna go with. Um, in the light heavyweight division, obviously, fairly stacked division in some ways. Obviously, got a lot of British interests in the division as well. Callum Smith, Watsy, Anthony Yard, and all those guys. Is Ramirez outside of Peter Bive, obviously, who's the other champion in that division? Is Ramirez the best fight? Do you think for Bivol?
Um, Probably he's up there with the toughest fights aside from Beterbiev for Bivol. I mean, you mentioned it, so you look sort of to home for most of the sort of light heavyweights that Bivol hasn't fought. That would be a big challenge. You mentioned Yard and Beatty. I think Callum Smith is probably the one I would pick as maybe the come out on top if those three were to face off. Ramirez, well, he'll pose challenges. Obviously, he's huge. Even I don't know how he ever made super middleweight. I think he was weighing in the ring. It was reported at like 200 pounds for a fight. So he'll be bigger than Bivol, I'd imagine. You mentioned his record of 44-0. I think he's one of these ones where about 35 of them are sort of, you don't hesitate to say knockover jobs, but it's sort of the way Mexican fighters are built because they don't really have the culture of going down a long sort of amateur route. So I think it's an easy one to sell in that respect because people will say, "Oh my God, who's this for 44-0? This must be Cesar Chavez or something." He's obviously a great fighter, but I think the record sort of helps sell that. If you factor in the people Bivol's already faced and beat, you mentioned them there, and obviously I think we all know what the toughest fight is that sort of all Russian affair with Turbia. But I would say this is maybe Callum Smith aside. I think I'd probably pick Callum Smith ahead of Ramirez, but that's a really close fight. So yeah, it's the toughest, if not one of the toughest that can be made, apart from Beterbiev for my money, anyway.
Yeah, no, you alluded to it there actually. We can touch on that now because you're saying obviously the size difference. So Ramirez is 6 foot 2.5 with a 75-inch reach. Bivol's 6 foot with 72-inch reach. So slight, obviously height and reach advantage there. Looking at it, and like we said, obviously the CV, Ramirez's CV, not necessarily with a lot of so it's big names on it, but obviously 30 knockouts, 44 wins. With that additional size and with obviously Bivol's style, obviously being in that also, he's not necessarily known for being a big puncher in the division. Do you see? I'm actually going to come to you. This is probably the other way around, and the people in the editorial board of ESPL are tearing their hair out here. How do you see this fight stylistically going? Do you think that Ramirez can actually get to Bivol, or do you think he'll actually look at it and go, "I can use my size essentially and try and go for a points victory"?
Um, I think it's very difficult to see him outboxing Bivol. I know you can win a fight on points without necessarily outboxing someone. I think he'll have pockets of success. I would imagine if like Canelo was able to hit Bivol. Obviously Canelo technically, fundamentally, probably a better fighter than Ramirez. And yeah, there could be hairy moments in the fight for Bivol without a doubt. I just think he might be a bit too cute. Feet might be a bit too good. He'll have an edge in hand speed. Obviously, massive amateur pedigree. So yeah, there's obviously a way to win for Ramirez. It's a competitive fight. Like it's far from a foregone conclusion that Bivol will win. And Bivol's been hurt before. Joe Smith Jr. Caught him flush, had him really. It looked like the legs had sort of gone. It was just happened to be at the very end of a round, and he was able to recover. And West Ramirez maybe isn't as big a one puncher as Joe Smith Jr. He's probably slightly technically better, so maybe got a better means to land the power, you would say. But I just think Bivol a bit too much craft. Feet might be a bit too good, and I don't know if Ramirez will get to him for a prolonged enough period of time to, bring about a stoppage or to hurt him badly enough that he can win the fight in points.
That's interesting you say that as well, because obviously you mentioned Canelo there as well and having success. Was there anything, and obviously also the Bivol's extremely successful amateur record as well. Do you think was there anything that you saw? Obviously, a smaller man, obviously with so it's obviously different compared to if you compare Ramirez with Canelo. But obviously, this is height and reach difference and size difference. But was there anything? What sort of frailties looking at that recent performance? Did you see anything that Canelo exploited potentially in Bivol that could be exploited by Ramirez, or was it? Did you essentially did that Canelo fight versus Bivol go the way you expected it to go as well?
No, I'm not going to sit here and try and say that I knew Bivol would outbox him. I thought it would be a tough fight, but Canelo was in such a crest of a wave at that stage. You thought you'd think he'd beat everyone from 160 to 175. Um, nah, it's hard to say because as you say, they're so stylistically and physically different fighters, and I don't think Canelo really exploited anything from Bivol. But because of the difference, in the physicality and the approaches that Ramirez will take us compared to Canelo, that's not to say that there aren't frailties there. I mean, going into that fight, Bivol's reputation's completely sort of changed as a result of that Canelo fight. Like people were, as I say, Canelo was a massive favourite going into that. People had seen the Richards fights. But I think it's just a case of in the fights, Bivol didn't look as good in. He maybe wasn't as up for, didn't feel as if he needed to look as good in. But if he has a night where he sort of fights the pace he like fought against Craig Richards, for example, then Ramirez can definitely have joy, like with his physical attributes, the power, obviously. He's puts on good pressure. So, there's obviously like if you're going in from the Ramirez camp, it's not as if to say like, oh, this is like the Terminator. There's no frailties. We've seen they'll have a game plan. They'll have watched a lot more Dimitri Bivol than me or you have, and they'll have seen some things that they think they can exploit with Ramirez's attributes. Definitely.
Obviously, I'm just thinking about where we're gonna. So I think I think I'm not taking too many liberties here in suggesting that I think we're both probably leaning slightly towards Bivol as being victorious here on Saturday, and I think a lot of the speculation really to do with Bivol has really been about post this fight, really, and obviously the talk of him potentially fighting Vitabayev, but then there's also talk about even the Canelo sort of rematch, the money involved in that. I just like to get your thoughts really on how you'd like to see or where you'd like to see Bivol go after this, where he's proved victorious.
Oh, it has to be the Beterbiev fight. Like I don't want to. I'll be like the Canelo fight will obviously still be a huge fight and sell really well, but I'll be gutted if they make that fight instead of the Beterbiev fight. I know there's like promotional barriers to overcome with Beterbiev being on top rank and Bivol being with the zone, but I'm not sure how long term Bivol's thing is the zone and the zone and top rank have worked together loads of time. Hearns obviously said that they're waiting to see this fight for Canelo's next move, but I hope they just sort of duck the Bivol rematch. To be honest, I think even though Canelo, he beat Golovkin in the most convincing fashion of the three fights, I still think he looked as if he had regressed a bit from the fighter that beat Saunders and Yildirim and everyone else in that sort of super middleweight run. So I think Fury, Usyk aside, I don't know if there's a fight I'd like to see more than Beterbiev and Bivol. They're two top 10 pound for pound fighters, like, without a doubt. Everyone would
I'm
have
gonna have to press you here, Danny, and say obviously Vitabayev 18 KOs, 18 victories. Bivol also undefeated as well with I think it was 20 with 11 KOs. How do you see that fight? I mean, I'm not going to ask you for necessarily stylistically of how you see it going, but if you had to bet, you've got some money, a free pot of money. How which way are you betting for that fight? Where it to happen next?
Beterbiev is what 37 now,
37 now, yeah.
If it's still the Beterbiev that was against Joe Smith Jr., I don't see how anyone stands up to that power. Like that's been like Bivol, he's got good feet, but like he can be got, and like if Beterbiev's hitting you for any period of time, you're in serious trouble. But if Beterbiev has maybe lost a step, the feet and hands aren't as good what they were then. Bivol obviously had more than live in that fight, but I just want to see it, mate. I just really hope we see it.
So let's take, like, so it's interesting we mentioned that. Obviously, Peter Bayoff's now, well, 37 years old. If we take, and we've obviously touched briefly, I suppose, on the other names in that division, I'll just run through them again for viewers. So we've obviously got Ramirez, obviously, who's fighting Callum Smith for the British interest. Joe Smith Jr. is still down there. Obviously, Buatsi, Yardi, Pascal, these sort of names that are bouncing around. Do you think that the way the light heavyweight division is set, so let's go beyond maybe necessarily Bivol and Peter Bayoff and say maybe the next 2 years, 3 years. Do you think Bivol is going to have to stay? I mean, he's only 31 years old. Stay at that division and possibly unify the division, or do you think that? I mean, how do you see it potentially going? Were Peter Bayoff to sort of step back in an age related cause? How do you see that the shape of that division going?
As I say, you'd have to make Bivol a favourite against everyone, not name Beterbiev. As you sort of said, there seems to be like this crop of like almost all British fighters. Maybe that's just our bias waiting for the world title shot. You've got Buatsi was linked with that Bivol fight. Callum Smith stated openly wants to become a 2-weight world champion. Yar Beterbiev seems to be happening in January, which what a fight that'll be as well.
Oh
Won't last long.
yeah.
But I don't know. Like it's if Beterbiev was to go, you would say it'll be someone that Frank Warren's got a fairly good relationship with the WBO, doesn't he, in top rank, so they'll shoehorn someone into that. But yeah, I think every light heavyweight in Britain sort of both all hoping that Beterbiev sort of departs, probably the same with Bivol. But those two sort of head and shoulders above the rest for me, I think.
And let me just so we'll just finish. We'll finish on the British interest. Yeah, I think as well. We'll just say I think you've kind of touched on it, but if we take obviously those names, so obviously Smith, Brad Yardi, even Callum Johnson, is Smith the one for you then that in that division over the next sort of couple of years is the one that sort of stands out as the best chance, or are you saying maybe Buatsi's unheard of necessarily, well, unfulfilled potential to a degree, but out of those four, which one would you lean towards as carrying the best able to carry the British torch over the next couple of years?
I think Callum Smith's looked unreal at light heavyweight. Just so entertaining. Has carried his power up and more from super middle. But I'd say there's just something missing for me. Like I know Craig Richards, sorry, like, done well against Bivol, but if you looked at the first 3 rounds of that fight, Beatty like so much sharper, was landing clean, like looked as if he could have stopped Richards down the stretch, and then just maybe it's a gas issue, maybe it's he sort of fights and bursts to conserve his energy, which you can't help. And then Yard again, like massive power, like so like gifted athletically, but just a gas tank. But he looked improved in the Arthur rematch. So if he could be the 3-belt world champion in 2 months' time. You never know. And then this debate sort of moot. But for me, at the way the lay of the land currently is, Callum Smith would be the horse I'd be backing. I think.
No, I think no, I'd agree. I agree with you. I think especially the way that we've seen those guys develop, like you say, the power that he carries up there, obviously the size he's got seems natural at that weight as well. So I'm going to leave. Well, we're going to finish here and say that obviously we've got a betting interest as a betting show. There's other content coming out this week, but for those that do like to bet, I'm going to have to press you, Danny, now and say, going back to Ramirez, Bivol, if you had again, how are you leaning? Are you leaning Bivol points? Are you leaning Bivol UD? Do you think there's any way of it being a stoppage? Just yeah, you've got a bet slip in your hand, a biro, and I'm going, Danny, where are you going with this?
Well, like every boxing fight that's on at the weekend, but I definitely will have a bet slip in my hand. Oh, guy, it's not the most glamorous pick in the world. You'll not be retiring off it, but just through Bivol points in your ACA for me. Like, he'll be, if it is remotely close, you'd imagine he'd be the favoured fighter over in Abu Dhabi as well. Not that I think that will come into it, but I've not even looked at the price. And I said he's 1-6 to win the fight, so I guess it's probably like maybe 8-13, 8-15 for a points win. So throw that in your accumulator.
Thank you very much, Danny, for that betting insight, and I suppose also the insight, to other viewers that you might be at the early stages of a gambling problem. But I think if we if we leave
Not
it
early,
there,
bit well on stages, not early.
we say yeah. So thank you very much for joining me, Danny. And yeah, so obviously this fight's taking place Saturday night. Check out obviously the other content that we've got coming out this week. You know, there'll be other interviews, other previews. But like I said, like Danny and I mentioned there, the betting show, various other stuff we've got going on. So check out the channel, check it out for that. And Danny, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining me. If you have any final words, please say them now.
No problem, mate. That was a beautifully crafted outro. There's nothing I could add to it. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you guys. Thank you for watching.